Welcome everyone to our EDI webinar series. I'm Maya Fujiwara, the Director of Prince Takamado Japan Center for Teaching and Research at University of Alberta. I'm speaking from Treaty 6 territory tonight, on which the University of Alberta is located, and we respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. The Prince Takamado Japan Center also stands with the people of Ukraine and condemns any military attacks on their territory, hoping to promote global peace, freedom, and cooperation. This is our third webinar in this series, and we are going to explore temporary workers' psychological issues. I would like to thank Consul General of Japan in Calgary for its generous support, which made this event possible, and our two speakers, Professor Salami and Professor Ogawa, for joining us. EDI initiative should be one of the most significant endeavors in our institution and in our society. Japan and Canada are quite different in their national images, one representing the myth of homogeneity and the other multiculturalism. Interestingly, however, the challenges that both countries have are quite similar as settler colonial nation state. This webinar is designed to find our common ground. Since its establishment, the Prince Takamado Japan Center for Teaching and Research has been committed to the promotion of intellectual exchanges between Japan and Canada. The current pandemic situation has made it difficult for us to interact in person and encourage student mobility between the two countries, which are significant parts of our academic mandate. But our mission remains to create opportunities for intellectual exchanges internationally. So tonight, I'm very honored to have Consul General Tatsukuni Uchida with us today. Now I'd like to invite him to make his opening remarks. Soryoji, yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
Thank you very much. Good evening to Canadian audience and good morning to Japanese audience. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to attend this webinar tonight. I understand that this is the third installment of the webinars, Challenge to Equity and Diversity and Inclusion Approaches in Japan and Canada. Today's topic is immigration and welfare and care. And this is a very, very interesting topic. I took this position as Consul General, Japan's Consul General in Calgary last spring. And so this has been already nearly 1 year since my arrival. And one of the things which I love here in Canada is your society of diversity. I really believe that Canada is a very fantastic country to have many different type of people from different backgrounds. I'm very interested in Canadian immigration policy. And also I'm pleased to have contact with the Canadians with different backgrounds, including Ukrainians and the Japanese and so on. I wonder that the Canadian immigration policy and the situation of immigrants is everything is so rosy. And that is was something which I'm very interested in. And also, whereas in Japan, we are now on the way to more diversity in our society and our country. And we are now facing an aging society with fewer children and with a shrinking population. And in order to keep Japan as a vital country, we need some help. And one of the options for Japan to adapt is to accept more foreign workers. I think that we have many things to do to make more this procedure smoothly and also successfully done for the social integration. Japan and Canada are very different, as geographically Canada is almost 30 times larger than Japan. But population-wise, Canada's population is 1/3 of Japan. And also historically, Japan has been a more or less relatively homogeneous country in around more than 2,000 years, whereas Canada is a relatively young country. And culturally and in terms of society, we are quite different. But at the same time, but I think that there are many things in common. Some challenges which come from the modern society, like environmental policies and fight against the climate change and other things. And this area of immigration is also one topic, one field that I think we can learn each other. Of course, I know that we cannot directly implant the Canadian experience and know-how into Japan's soul. But we can learn something from Canadian experiences and know-hows, and maybe vice versa. So I really hope this webinar can be a precious opportunity for audiences and participants to learn something interesting and something useful and something new. I would like to thank Prince Takamaro Japan Center and everyone who have worked very hard to organize this seminar, and also to presentators from Japan and Canada, and also all the audiences for your participation. So I really hope that you can have useful and pleasant discussion and seminar. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Consul General. Now I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Chelsea Meir. She's a student at the University of Alberta. So Chelsea.
Thanks, Aya. And our first speaker tonight will be Dr. Bukola Salami. Dr. Salami is an associate professor in the Faculty of Nursing, University of Alberta. Her research program focuses on policies and practices shaping migrants' health. She has been involved in around 60 funded research projects. In 2020, she became a recipient of the Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society International Nurse Researcher Hall of Fame Award, one of the highest research awards in nursing. So we're so pleased to have her here with us tonight.
So I'll be presenting a series of studies that I have done on migrant workers, temporary foreign workers. I must say it was difficult choosing what to present because I just had a lot of studies. So here's the agenda. I respectfully acknowledge that I am located, and I think some of us are, probably half of us here, in Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place of diverse indigenous people, including the Cree, the Blackfoot Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose history, languages, and culture continue to influence our vibrant community. Many of us here in Canada have come as settlers, immigrants, newcomers, either in this generation or in the previous generation. And I'm very, very mindful of the broken covenants and strive to make this right with the land, with indigenous people, and with each other. I'm also very, very grateful for indigenous people for giving me such a great opportunity and privilege to be able to live on this land. So I thank my funders, my doctoral committee members. I'll be presenting some of my doctoral work, and also the co-investigators that have been involved in some of my research. The goal of the Health and Immigration Policies and Practices Research Program, which I lead, is to address the gaps in immigration and health policies and practices. We've been involved in around 80 funded research projects, including on temporary foreign workers, living caregivers, internationally educated nurses, African child migration, Black people's health, immigrant mental health, and so many others. The goal is to drive high-impact policy and practice research on migration, to mentor and train diverse, talented researchers, to build cross-sectoral networks to improve immigrant health, and to shape Canadian and international policy and practice. Canada's immigration policy, Canada's Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, one of the objectives is to permit Canada to pursue maximum social, cultural, and economic benefits of immigration. The immigration policy in Canada largely balances three main goals. There are several other goals. There are, I think, around 8 goals of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act: to support the development of a strong and prosperous Canadian economy, to see families reunited in Canada, and to provide a safe haven for refugees. And because of this, we have several immigration routes in Canada. We have permanent immigration routes, and we have temporary immigration routes. The Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Provincial Nominee Program, the Family Class, business class, and also we have individuals who come as refugees, humanitarian refugee claimants. A large percentage of those that migrate to Canada, the biggest percentage coming under the skilled worker migration route. We also have temporary foreign worker caregiver program, could be argued to be both a permanent and also a temporary route. The temporary foreign worker program with LMIA, which allows individuals to be able to come to Canada on a temporary basis to be able to work in Canada, although we know that some of them, they continue to stay in Canada for a long period of time and just continue renewing their visa over time. We have the seasonal agricultural worker program, which allows agricultural workers to come to Canada, usually for maybe around 8 months of the year. And oftentimes during the cold season, they go back to their countries. And many of these individuals come from Mexico and also the Caribbean. An international mobility program, and a lot of US Canada agreements come through the international mobility program. So I'll talk about my doctoral research. We looked at the migration of Philippine educated nurses to Canada through the Living Caregiver Program. I used the global care chain, and the global care chain is a concept by Hochschild. It's a transnational feminist concept that looks at the personal links across the globe based on paid and unpaid work of caring. And it really takes into consideration the interlocking identities related to gender, race, class, and nationality. So a perfect example of a global care chain is a woman working in North America. For her to be able to work, she may need a caregiver to be able to provide childcare for her kids. So she hires someone from the Philippines to come and take care of a child. Of course, the person in the Philippines also has a child that then she passes over to a relative or someone else. So what we start seeing is a transfer of care work down the hierarchies of both gender and also nationality. I interviewed 15 Filipino living caregivers and 9 stakeholders, and also including one immigration policymaker, 4 nurse educators, 2 representatives of support groups, and 2 recruiters. This is some of the data, and one of the things that becomes clear in this, and these are nurses that had worked. When I started my interview, I realized that many of those nurses had worked in Saudi Arabia prior to migrating to Canada. There tends to be 2 different paths. A lot of living caregivers to Canada work in Hong Kong and Taiwan before coming to Canada. But I found that a lot of those that were actually nurses tend to work in the Middle East before they migrate to Canada. So of course, my question here is, why do nurses work as living caregivers in other countries? Work as living caregivers in Saudi Arabia, earn a lot of money, some of them working as supervisors, and then they decide to come to Canada to work as domestic workers. One of those was citizenship for the family. One said, I thought I can start even in the lowest position, as long as in the long run, I'm looking for the future, that I can bring my family and we can all be together. It's all for the family. That's my main purpose of coming here. And many of them talked about the role of family in the decision-making process to come here. With everyone that was telling me it's all because of the family, I decided to interview 2 people that didn't really have family members or didn't have children. And one of those people said, well, I am hoping that in the future, I'll be able to bring my mother to Canada. So then it still tells me it's all for the family. And then the other person said, well, yeah, I wonder why I'm still here. I want to just get my PR and move back to Saudi Arabia and continue working in Saudi Arabia. So that helped crystallize that maybe really the main advantage of coming here as a living caregiver and experiencing downward occupational mobility is not just for yourself, but also to provide a better future for your family, especially if you're already living a better life in Saudi Arabia. Social status, if you come from the US or Canada, it's more higher socioeconomic status. So the first thing I think of coming, I'm not thinking of what other life I'm going to face here. And lifestyle and freedom, because Saudi Arabia is not that open. I can bring my children there. If my husband is there, we can stay there, but eventually I'll send them back because I don't want them to grow up there. I also asked, so why didn't you migrate as a skilled worker? Some of them didn't have the knowledge in terms of the migration part of a skilled worker. And some of them also talked about the time and the money that it takes to migrate as a skilled worker. That, it was cheaper and they thought it would take less time to migrate as a caregiver. many of them experience barriers in nursing registration process, and one of those is barriers in credential assessment. So seeing that their credentials are not seen as being equivalent to Canada. They also experience challenges with proof of immigration status, proof of citizenship and immigration status. So oftentimes before they can become registered to practice in Canada, they have to have a permanent resident status. And because they didn't have a permanent resident status, then they cannot practice for a while in Canada. So they must continue working as domestic workers. They also have experience in terms of demonstrating recent safe nursing practice. Demonstrating recent safe practice, oftentimes they have challenges being able to get documentations from their previous employer that they were practicing as nurses before coming to Canada. Also, the challenges, many of them, they work as living caregivers for 2 to 4 years. And after that, it may take another 2 to 4 years for them to be able to actually practice in Canada. Well, they must be able to demonstrate to the College of Nurses of Ontario, I did this study in Ontario, by the way, that they've practiced within the last 5 years. But because a lot of them have been out of practice for so long, completing their living caregiver status, becoming a permanent resident, you're not able to demonstrate this. And also barriers in terms of bridging programs. So a lot of bridging programs were offered on evenings and weekends. And a lot of them also have to work on evenings and weekends. And because of that, that creates a challenge. A lot of bridging programs are offered during the week, and a lot of them need to work during the weekend because there are no programs on evenings and weekends. That creates a challenge. And also many of them, even though if they want to go back to school, they have to pay international student fees. And because international student fees are so expensive, then that creates a challenge. Barriers in completing exam, the processing time, passing English and French language exam is difficult for some. And some of them, they attempt the exam several times. At that time, there was a different exam. Now we have NCLEX, and they are not able to pass it within 3 attempts. And after a while, they are not able to continue. Oftentimes, the employer also has an influence on whether or not they pass the exam, because if the employer is giving you a difficult time, then that creates a challenge. I completed this project in 2012, which was a while back, but there's been changes to the immigration policy in Canada. We've converted from the Living Caregiver Program to the Caregiver Program. And now I think there's a pilot program now that as individuals that are able to actually come to Canada and have permanent resident status. And that was through advocacy from the research like mine and some of the advocacy work that allows people to be able to come to Canada. That has implications, including, of course, in facilitating registration in Canada and professional integration. There's been some pause in processing of caregiver applications or delayed processing time because of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the time when I did this study, there was no National Nursing Assessment Service. Now we have a centralized place where you can submit your application to begin the processing of your nursing registration, as opposed to before it used to be you have to go to different provinces separately. So I did another study on that one, the occupational mobility of internationally educated nurses to licensed practical nurses in Canada. So looking at nurses that they had the qualification or they had a bachelor's degree, which would have made them to become registered nurses in Canada. And registered nurses in Canada, usually you need a 4-year equivalent degree, but they were working as licensed practical nurses, and as licensed practical nurses, usually you only need a 2-year diploma. So what are some of the factors contributing to that? We interviewed 14 baccalaureate prepared internationally educated nurses, and we thematically analyzed our data. Some of them migrated to Canada for better personal and professional lives. I just wanted a good education for my children. I'm here because of the children. So I hope that you're listening to how gender influences people's choices in terms of migration. Gender roles as mother influences people's choice to be able to actually accept a downward occupational mobility just to be able to provide for the needs of their children. I was looking for a better life of my children. And also in the Philippines, we don't get paid a lot. And also gender roles also influences people's professional integration. Sometimes people are trying to study at the same time as well as take care of family. And sometimes it's common for women to prioritize the needs of their family. That delays their registration process. Difficult credential assessment and recognition. I was working as a full-time not only full-time. At the back of my mind, I didn't push through the application. So at the time, it expired. So there are some that start the process. The process just gets delayed long and long and long. Things expire. On the long run, they don't end up actually practicing. One said, we never expected the credential process will be long, and it's different. They didn't tell us that the substantial, now that has changed, exam evaluation criteria that we have to go through. And IENs that I've spoken to lately keep talking about, the length of time it takes, that it could take around 1.5 to 2 years for you to actually, after you started the process and I arrived in Canada, for you to be able to start practice. Barriers in pre-gen program. I know a lot of classmates who have kids who are toddlers and they're struggling because some of the people I interviewed for this were living in Edmonton. If they need to take a bridging program, they need to drive to Calgary because there are no bridging programs in Edmonton. So imagine if you're living in Edmonton and you need to complete a bridging program, the one available at Mount Royal University. For 2 years, you have to either be traveling back and forth or relocate. This is something that is very, very amendable to government intervention to create a bridging program that is available in Edmonton. The only school, some in Toronto, talked about the school that is in Toronto. There was a news report that said the College of Nurses, there was a time that they would tell maybe every year around 500 internationally educated nurses to go and complete upgrading programs. But there was only 50 spots available. And that really creates a barrier because there's really no spot available. Difficulty in passing the language exam and nursing exam, and long processing of the registration and shorter process. Some of them are also motivated to go to take the LPN route because the LPN route, the processing time they found is shorter. So they go the LPN route because they know the RN route will take them longer. They experience de-skilling once they register as LPN and also ambivalent skill recognition. So oftentimes they find that they're not able to use all the skills they have as LPN. I'll talk about a project that I recently completed, and this is the first time I'm going to present any data from this. It's going to be published soon on migration and precarity from the temporary foreign worker program to permanent resident status. For this project, we sought to look at the experiences of individuals who had transitioned from being temporary foreign workers to other status and what factors contribute to it. The data that I will present here is to look at those that have transitioned from temporary foreign workers to undocumented migrant status. I interviewed 38 qualitative interview with 39 temporary foreign workers in Alberta. We also did a survey of 187 current or past temporary foreign workers. And we did 3 focus groups, and each of those focus groups had between 5 to 8 people. And we did 6 conversation cafes. The conversation cafes had between 10 and 100 people on each conversation cafe. For the interviews, we had 11 temporary foreign workers who were undocumented or without status. And for the survey, we had less people that were undocumented. I think we had maybe around 5 or 6 that were without status. And 53% men, 46% women. So some of the factors that influence their transition from temporary foreign worker status to student or undocumented status, it includes the fact that they've made a huge investment to come to Canada. Some of them have paid between $10,000 and $30,000. When you lose your status, you can't just go back because you have a whole burden on you. And there's also humiliation of going back that contributes to this, and also exploitation that some of them have. Application delays. So some of them experience delays in terms of the application with AIMP. AIMP is Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program. So some of them apply to transition to permanent resident status. And because of the delay in application, they become out of status. So, you either stay back or become undocumented, and some of them decide to stay back. Bureaucratic constraints, including waiting times for LMIA increase. Employers became discouraged by as arduous LMIA process, also rigid immigration criteria, and application filing and processing errors. So, I listened to some of the recruiters. There were some recruiters and immigration consultants basically didn't really know exactly what they were doing. And because of that, they messed up the application process. And because of that, the person was ineligible to stay in Canada. And in the face of being eligible to stay in Canada and thinking about how much you owe, many of them decide to stay. So some of the experiences of undocumented migrants include increased insecurity and fear of deportation barriers in accessing services, exploitation. Some of the challenges temporary foreign workers face that we are listed there, including sexual abuse, and was reported by one of them. The temporary foreign worker said, "He touched me on my rear one time in the factory wood. I was working on the wood and selecting wood, and I feel the finger just passed and just touched my rear." Physical abuse and unsafe working conditions, psychological abuse, verbal abuse, racism and discrimination at work, exploitation by employers, exploitation by recruiters, exploitation by immigration consultants, family separation, limited health coverage, limited knowledge, and poverty.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salami, for sharing this. It's really fascinating. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Now we're going to move on to Dr. Reiko Ogawa. Reiko Ogawa is a professor in the Graduate School of Social Sciences at Chiba University. Her research interest is on migration, gender, and civil society. She serves as a board member for the Japan Association for Migration Policy Studies, chairperson of Gender Equality Committee of Chiba City, refugee counselor of Minister of Justice, and representative of Chiba Studies on Migration and Refugees. Some of her ongoing projects include creating a checklist of supervising organizations. We're really excited to have Reiko here with us today.
Thank you so much for your introduction. And I really feel so honored and inspired to be here today. What Dr. Salami had presented, I can really relate it so well. It just sounds so familiar with the situation of the migrants as well as those who are working in the care field. But 3 points different between Canada and Japan, just regarding the migrants. One is the history of migration has been quite different. I think you have a longer history of having a living care worker, while as for us, it really started very recently. And secondly, as you emphasized, in Canada, you have something called immigration policy as such. But in the case of Japan, the government refuses to take the proper stance towards establishing an immigration policy. And thirdly, I think in Canada, in general, there's an embracement towards diversity, and that makes a big difference, I believe. Today, I'm going to talk about migrants in change in Japan and globalization of care. I have been working in this field for more than 10 years, and I'm a sociologist. I also do some studies in the sending countries of those migrants. This is the outline for today's talk. The research question is, how are migrants incorporated within the Japanese care labor market? But of course, these things are very much ongoing. So first, I would like to explain about the background of the issue to provide the context. That's the structural transformation of care, to have a bit of an overview of how the migrant care workers are situated within East Asia. And then I will talk about the transformation of care and migration in Japan by mentioning two very different schemes which allowed the migrants to come in. For the background, a lot of literature points out that there's a structural transformation of care in the developed countries, largely due to the demographic change, which all the developed countries are facing. In the case of Japan, close to 30% are above 65 years old, and that is really a major thing. It's really the fastest aging society. And then the women's participation in the labor market has increased in the past decades. This means that the caring capacity of the families has shrinked. So the families are no longer being able to provide care. And the retrenchment of the welfare state has been pointed out in many places, including Japan. And I was just wondering about how this impact of the recent crisis in Ukraine and the whole militarization of the world would impact and further downgrade our social expenditure. The outsourcing of care or the commodification of care has been taking place in different places, including Japan. And then the social trend called feminization of migration, where Dr. Salami explained that the global care chain is taking place, and the migrant women are dragged into work like domestic work and care work within the gendered labor market. in the international gendered labor market. If we look at how the migrant care workers are incorporated within the East Asian welfare state, the East Asian welfare state is often described as familialist and developmentalist. Developmentalist welfare state prioritizes economic growth over the social welfare of their citizens and depends on the family to provide care. But if you look at Table 1 and Table 2, you can see that there's a significant difference in the number of migrant care workers. Well, here, Japan has much larger population with the highest aging ratio, but the number of migrant care workers remains so small. So the number of migrants actually do not correlate with the magnitude of its aging population. Why is it? Well, there are two different approaches to migrant care workers in East Asia. In the case of Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, the public support towards care is limited, and then the strong family responsibility has been emphasized to provide old age care. There, they have a very liberalized immigration policies and market solutions for the family to hire the migrant care workers. The majority of the migrants work as living care workers, while as Japan and actually Korea has introduced this long-term care insurance, which is a social insurance to finance care that aims for socialization of care. And this has been combined with the restrictive immigration policy, where the migrants would work under this LTCI. In the case of Japan, most of the migrants work in institutional care only. And actually, we don't have living care workers, migrant living care workers. What we need to understand is that the migrant care workers are differently constructed according to how the migration and care regime has been constructed. In the case of Japan, these are the number of the migrants in the labor market. It's just 1.7 million or 2.4% of the total labor force. But as you can see, the number of those who are in the health and social welfare field is just 3%. So it's very limited. And the reason is that because it really started quite recently, while as the other sectors like manufacturing, wholesale and retail, hotels and restaurants started much earlier, probably in the 1990s. With the introduction of the technical internship trainee program. Even though the number of the migrants in the medical and social welfare sector is quite limited, you can see that there's a huge increase within the past 10 years. And even though between 2020 and 2021, even under the COVID, there is an increase of more than 10,000 people. So next, I would like to explain about the transformation of the care and migration. The phase one was the introduction of the long-term care insurance in 2000. So this is a public insurance, 50% funded by the tax and 50% funded by the insurance premium. And the introduction of the LTCI actually opened up the whole care labor market. So the care labor market expanded rapidly because the LTCI allowed different service providers to come in. So the nonprofit organization, the for-profit organization, they all came in to provide services. Then secondly, in year 2008, there was this economic partnership agreement being established with Japan and Southeast Asian countries. In this free trade agreement, there was attachment that the migrant nurses and care workers are allowed to come to Japan, and I will explain a bit more later. And the third phase started in 2017, where the government amended the immigration law to allow people to come in and work in the field of care under different schemes. So what I call is the deregulation of migration regime. And so first, there was an opening up for the international students to study long-term care. And secondly, technical internship trainee program, which is called as trainees to acquire certain skills to be brought back to their home countries. And 2017, within the list of occupations, care work was included. And in 2019, there's a new scheme called specified skilled worker. So what happened? The first wave of migrant care workers came under this EPA, and it was a bilateral agreement between Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. It's a government-to-government program, and the migrants will receive like 1 year of Japanese language training before they start working. So the preparation stage was very well set. And the people were recruited from the graduate of nursing schools or a 4-year university of the college graduate. Actually, they have experienced a similar kind of de-skilling, which Dr. Bukola talked about. And they were required to pass the certified care worker exam after 3 years. Well, there was the issue of this credential assessment just being spoken about in Canada, but actually in Japan, there is no mutual recognition of agreement. And of course, the care work, or especially long-term care work, there is no such credentials in the sending countries. So the credential assessment was out of question. So they had to study Japanese and they had to pass the exam in Japanese. But once they are certified, they can renew the visa for indefinite period of time and they can bring their families. So after more than 10 years, what happened is that these are the number of care workers. There close to 6,000 of them have arrived, within which 1,754 has passed the exam and became a certified care worker. The latest figure says that at least 3,152 are working as care workers. But this should be much more because they have already changed their visa status. But also it should be noted that though they became certified care worker, not everyone will stay in Japan and seek for opportunities elsewhere. And I know some of them have actually migrated to Canada. This is the newspaper clipping saying that the first batch of Indonesian care worker has passed the exam of a care manager, which is a higher position. So he has been aiming high. And also some of them have passed the nursing exam. And this is a photograph of Japanese language course being given to the spouse of the migrant care worker. What happened is that after 10 years, the people became the leaders or the managers within the care facility, and they brought their families, and some of them had already got the permanent residency. Since this was really the first time for the care facilities to employ a foreigner as their staff, the care facilities were extremely reluctant in the beginning. And some of people said Japanese can only be cared by Japanese. In fact, when it took place, this is something that is happening. This is an interview to a director of a care facility. He says that in the beginning, we were not sure how the elderlies and the families will respond. But when they actually start working, they became very popular from both sides. It was really good to have them. The families would usually ask the Japanese staff who understands the language, but they ask the EPA care workers as if they are supporting them. So there was a very good supporting environment and team building in the working place. And this is another research done to 3 care facilities in Tokyo, asking for the Japanese care workers, how do you evaluate the EPA care workers as your co-workers? Everybody actually said they well appreciate, highly appreciate, or very highly appreciate. And in the free answer, they responded like, I have found that working with foreigners is not a problem. In Japan, the number of the foreigners is so small, it was basically all Japanese, but the encounter within the workplace has really opened up their eyes that, okay, we are all human beings and we have something very much in common and there's no problem in working with a foreigner. And some said that I admire their positive attitude towards obtaining the license. Then if we look back, isn't this a bit counterintuitive? Because in Japan, we don't have a very good history of accommodating the migrants. I would argue that for the EPAs, the migration management has been relatively transparent. So for the recruitment was done in the nursing schools or the university graduates in the sending country. The preparation was fairly well. The Japanese language training had like 1 year and there was no placement fees. So it was all covered by the government as well as the care facility. And when they start working, since they needed to pass this national exam of care work, there was a very good support towards them in both work and study, as well as their labor. The working conditions has been monitored and supervised well. And of course, there's a clear career path. So support towards obtaining a license has been provided, and that is accompanied by the citizenship. So this migration management has really been the key to the success. So then what can we learn from this experience of EPA? It actually opened up a pathway for migrants to work as care workers. And the key to success is the strong state commitment, support, and regulation. And also the national exam to become a certified care worker, which was criticized because it was such a high hurdle for them to work. But it turned out that this created a career path for them. But then on the negative side, the cost for care facility has been too expensive. In our research, we found that in average, the care facility is shouldering 2.5 million yen, or this is in US dollar, 21,000 US dollar, aside from the salary. So this includes like recruitment fee, airfare, education in Japanese language and care work, and various benefits. Particularly the care facility had to support the study of the migrant care workers so that they can pass the exam. And this was considered to be a big burden, as only the large-scale care facilities have enough resources to do so. Also, number of migrants had actually resigned after becoming licensed. So this was a huge disappointment for the care facilities after so-called investing so much on them. And then we had encountered labor issues as usual. The overtime payment hasn't been paid. Some of them could not get their paid holidays. Some got pregnant. So all these issues has certainly surfaced. And these had to be responded in a much better way. After 2017, different channels had opened up because the EPA, the number of people was too small, and it was too costly, and it was too risky for the care facility to employ them because they had to invest a lot on them. Currently, we have 4 different channels at least for the labor migration of the migrants to work in the care field, which is actually very complicated. And as you can see, they have different aims: eligibility, Japanese language level, recruiters, period of stay, and salary. So the reason is because Japan does not have an immigration policy. So these channels has been developed one after the other without much coordination. What stands out is that for the international students, TITPs and SSWs, these are all mediated by private agencies. So the EPAs are more in an advantageous position, while as the others are in a way a market solution. And also the period of stay differs between the 4 channels. For EPAs and international students, there's a chance to become certified, but for the TITPs and SSWs, although theoretically they can try for the exam, it would be very difficult without getting any support. The other thing is that if you look at the educational background and the migration channels and the status in the labor market, you would realize that their educational background has not been really taken into account. So if you're very lucky, you can go through this EPA route, but otherwise you would be downgraded and you would end up working either as a part-time as an international student or working as full-time but as a supplementary worker. But then it is unlikely that the migrants will have all the information before they make the decision. So without knowing what kind of consequence they're going to face, they just sort of grab whatever opportunities that is available. But this will definitely lead to the stratification of the migrants within the labor market. And I think this is a very unfair system. And actually, it goes against the WHO Global Code of Practice on the international recruitment of health personnel, because the migrant health personnel should be hired, promoted, and remunerated based on an objective criteria. But within this system, it is not possible. The other issue is the marketization of care. As you can see, the institutional care under long-term care insurance, the law has been changed in 2015 because the cost has been too much. And now only those who have serious care needs can be admitted under the LTCI. But with the growing aging population, the number of the elderly in institutional care just has to go up. So those people who are not covered under the LTCI has been increasing. And this is actually related to the deregulation of migration. In an interview to an Indonesian EPA certified care worker, she said that Japanese staff are always talking about resigning, but the care business is expanding. So the care facility is aggressively recruiting the TITPs and students, and they do not provide any training. So I pity on the elderly. So this means that the deregulation of migration and marketization of care is closely connected. And here, the care facility is recruiting the TITPs and students who are not actually free laborers. The TITPs has to finish the contract. They cannot change their employers until they finish the contract or get the certificate. And for the international students, they usually come under the scholarship. But scholarship you need to pay back by working in the care facility. So actually, these are the people who are not free laborers. And what it means to be a migrant sounds very much similar with what we've heard in Dr. Bukola's presentation, that they are all facing a similar kind of issues. And especially the issues like reproductive right is a very challenging issue because actually the migrants are undertaking the reproductive labor while their reproduction has not been guaranteed. So the migrants has to be guaranteed with the same rights as citizens. Well, this is the Migration Integration Policy Index, where Japan ranks 34 below the average. Well, Canada actually ranked 4. And in the report, it states the reason that because Japanese policies still refuse to recognize that Japan is a country of immigration, this denial leads to contradictory policies, and it will only go halfway to guarantee the migrant equal opportunities like health and education, while also denying them several basic rights, most notably protection from discrimination. The way that governments treat immigrants strongly influence how well immigrants and the public interact and think of each other. Japan's current policies encourage the public to see immigrants as subordinate and not as laborers. So anti-discrimination measures in ensuring equal treatment and seeing migrants as members of the society is really urgently needed. So this is what I created with a migration care nexus. Since Japan does not have an immigration policy, the migrants are fragmented according to their residential status. But here's the permanent residency and temporary residency, and this is the care where here is the certified care worker. So only the permanent residency certified care worker are assured with a full citizenship. And I would argue that moving people from here to here would help both sides. For the care facilities, it will help them to have a quality and stable labor force, while as for the migrants, they can have a stable life together with their families. So in conclusion, the dependency towards migrant care workers have increased through opening up of deregulated channels. Migrants are incorporated within the care labor market, not due to their background or experience, but according to the channels that they enter. Immigration and integration policies needed to create an enabling environment, and career paths for migrants has to be supported to bring a win-win situation. So here we must meet two goals: ensuring the rights of migrants and making care decent work. And if the migrants are not cared, the Japanese will not be cared either. Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Reiko. That was another really fascinating discussion. I think we'll start with more of an open question. Dr. Salami, you yourself immigrated to Canada from Nigeria at age 16. And in an interview with The Gateway, you're quoted as saying, often a lot of the things I'm studying is actually studying myself. And I wanted to know, how have your personal experiences shaped your research?
When I first started my journey into this, was in undergrad. I was a nursing student, and I was told, pick a subject and talk about nursing policy. With my background as an immigrant and knowing that my parents experienced downward occupational mobility, I decided to look at nurses, internationally educated nurses in Canada, immigrant nurses. That was my first experience. And then I went for my PhD, and during my PhD, I was reading some of the work by Beatrice Spivak on subaltern studies, and she talks about subalternity as a position without identity. And I thought more about how could you be a subaltern in nursing, and the farthest you can go is really not to be a nurse. And so I wanted to look at those that were most affected in nursing. I did a pilot study and I found out more about living caregivers, and it made me go into living caregivers. And then from living caregivers, I switched to temporary foreign workers. So that has been a line of work. The presentation I did today, I should be honest with you that I don't have personal experience, either being a Filipino, being an internationally educated nurses, or being a temporary foreign worker. But of course, what led me to, in the first place, want to look at immigrants. My theoretical orientation then led me from my personal to now looking at, but I have a whole line of other work that I do. And what I present today is actually a very tiny bit of the bigger things I do. A lot of the work I do now are on Black people, Black youths, mental health of immigrant population, and the experience of African population immigrants in Canada. And a lot of the work that I do there is actually, honestly, just Bukola studying ourselves, our past self. There is a joy that you get when you look back and reflect, because you think, someone has helped me, let me help someone else. And how can I make life better for someone else? What is really the whole purpose? And I tell some of my colleagues, I'm like, what is the whole purpose about doing research and having it sit on the shelf without it being able to influence policy, contribute? And we don't have to change policy like that, but at least, if you can make a dent in it, if we all make a dent, then hopefully we shift things forward.
Yeah, we can really feel your passion, I think, when you talk about your research. And as you say, it might not even be directly involved, but it seems to light a fire, at least for you, and drive you to do research and also community work. So thank you. The same question for Reiko. I'm curious, what inspires your research?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Actually, I'm born in like a 4-generation family where we had the grandparents and the great-grandparents, and it was a big family. And I really enjoyed being with those elderly, and they have been very important to me. And I also had a lot of help from the community because my mother was working, and actually it was all the people in the community who helped me to be brought to the daycare center and to be fetched. So I had like all these kinds of help. Due to my father's work, I spent some time abroad. And when I came back, I really faced a big difficulty in adjusting or readjusting myself in Japan. So in a way, I really had experienced part of the hardship that the migrants are going through in understanding Japanese, writing Japanese properly, or how to be well fit within the society. And also I worked in the international development field for quite some time, helping the people in Southeast Asia to develop their project and empower themselves. And I also had a lot of friends there. And but actually, these are the sending countries of the migrants. So here you have like your immediate family, the elderly that needs to be taken care of, and then you have the migrants coming into Japan. So you have both sides, and I was sort of in the middle. So I do care about both, and I really want them to live a dignified life. But then the current system, there's a lot of gaps, a lot of discrepancies, and a lot of unfairness and exploitation and abuse. after becoming a researcher, I really wanted to help them. And I'm currently working with different stakeholders, including the care sector, in how to build a better infrastructure to accommodate the migrants in a better way. So we are now working with the checklist of those supervising organizations, which can often be quite exploitative in some way. And we are also working on the training material for the Japanese care workers who are working with the migrants, because we already have a lot of materials for the materials to support the migrants, but not so much of a training material to support the Japanese care workers to understand diversity and how to work together with the migrants. So we are working on that. And I'm also giving some training to the care facilities, which have accommodated a lot of migrant care workers to understand cultural diversity and treat them in a fair manner.
Thank you. It's so interesting how both of you can draw from your personal experiences to give you insights into these topics. We had a comment. They pointed out it sounds quite distressing for the migrant nurses and temporary agricultural workers. And I think that was in response to Dr. Salami at the end of your presentation. You were talking about some of the discrimination and harassment that these workers face. Currently in Canada, we have a bit of a crisis in nursing, and just that there's a huge demand for more workers. And I was wondering, do you think that this demand for workers, especially nurses, will that create opportunities for reform or cause almost these exploitative practices that you've been talking about to get worse?
I think what we've seen is band-aid solutions. So increasingly the government, facilitated the transition process for some workers, for example, to be able to challenge exam, practice as nurses. The question is it going to be permanent? Now, one of the challenges that we've had with many nurses is the time it takes for them to be able to practice in Canada. So some of them, it takes about, 2 years to be able to practice. And during that time, people get de-skilled. Some people also move to the US. And some people just get out of the profession. So we are losing nurses. We are also losing nurses because there's no space. So, we assess nurses and we say, oh, you need to take a bridging program, a 2-year program to be able to become a nurse in Canada. The only thing is that we are telling 500 people they need to take a 1-year program, but there's only 50 spots or 60 spots available. We have an opportunity here. I mean, nurses have a vital role to play in terms of us responding to this pandemic and also to future pandemics or emergencies. And we need to ensure that we have the sufficient workforce and a diverse workforce at all levels to be able to meet those needs.
That's a really good point. And I'm curious, Reiko, from your perspective from Japan, you interviewed a lot of workers and also their colleagues. And I was wondering what these workers described to you as being the most challenging coming to Japan, a new country. And how do you think that Japanese work culture needs to change in order to accommodate these new arrivals?
Because the migrant care workers are in institutional care. Institutional care means to say that the staff has to work in a team. Actually, compared to the living caregivers that are interviewed in Taiwan, the language requirement is actually very high. And I had the question also, what is the language requirement? So for the TITPs, it's actually JLPT N4 level. So if you're from a non-Chinese character country, you may have to study for several months in your home country, and that's a lot of investment actually. While as for other countries like Taiwan or Hong Kong, if they want to go there, there's no language requirement to learn Chinese, or even though if they had, it's very minimum. So this Japanese language requirements are actually very high and time consuming, as well as financial burden for the migrants. Recently, a lot of care facilities are using the IT technologies to amend those communication gaps, which is really good. But because you can't expect Japanese to speak like Bahasa Indonesia, for example, the migrants has to adapt to the level of the Japanese co-workers. If that is not enough, the kind of job that they are going to take would be more like a marginalized kind of work. So which means that like cleaning, for example, changing the diapers. So, and then they will not really get into what it means as a care work, the real essence of the care work. So they sort of fail to build up their skills. So the language has really been a problem. But what I've noticed among those care facilities is that compared to nursing or the hospitals, the medical treatment, in the care facility, there are far more diverse people, like those who lost their jobs in their 40s and 50s, the part-time workers or the housewives turned into care workers. And some of the people who are disabled are also becoming a care worker. So the composition of the staff is far more diverse in the care facility. So there's a hope that, okay, well, this person just happened that he or she he doesn't have a Japanese nationality, but then he can or she can work well. This kind of multicultural environment has been created within the care facility. And some would even say that if they have the heart to care, nationality is not an issue. So the diverse multicultural environment in the care facility is something that we need to enhance.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Diversity of experiences, not just from different nationalities, but different age groups, as you said, and different stages in their lives. Dr. Salami, whether there were any trends you noticed in terms of like the age of workers who are coming over. You mentioned that some of them have young kids.
Yeah, some of those that I interviewed, but I wanted to comment on Dr. Ogawa's comment about the diversity. And one of the things that we notice in our healthcare facilities here is when you go to those that are providing care work, there tends to be more immigrant people. So the higher up you go in the hierarchy, the less immigrants is one of the challenges you notice. Sometimes there's also segmentation, like immigrant population being much more, for example, in long-term care than, for example, in acute care or community care setting. So yes, there's diversity, but also thinking about inclusion. In terms of the language requirement for nurses in Canada, that is a big challenge. So for internationally educated nurses, some of them are unable to, they have to speak, read, write, and understand English and or French. And they have to pass either the IELTS CELBAN, or I think there's another exam in Quebec. And some of them are unable to pass this exam. The other thing is, I've heard from some nurses that after like 2 years, it expires. So you may pass it now. You start the registration process. It takes 2.5 years for you to complete the registration process, and it's expired. So then you have to take it again, take the exam again, and there's minimal score in each category. And then you may take it again, and now you don't meet the requirement when, of course, you've passed it before. So that's one of the challenges that some of the nurses here also experience. And I don't think it's actually nursing only. I think it's also many of the other professions. I know for international medical graduates too, that, after about 2 years or so, they need to retake the exam.
It sounds like an incredible amount of investment for something that may not have a payoff, as you say. So I wanted to ask one last very quick open question of both of you. So Dr. Salami, in addition to being a researcher, you're also an activist and community leader. Can you talk a bit about politics in academia and why it's important for academics to take a stand? You mentioned before that the time is now for us to seize this opportunity.
One of the African feminists that says, you're either part of the oppressor or you're the oppressed. Which one are you? And, you need to take a stance. Not speaking is, basically supporting. I do a lot of community engaged research. And by that, I hope to really, really capitalize on the strengths of communities, build their capacities, and actually also use that in terms of informing policies it's a lot of reward. And the reward that comes to it is when you know that you've been able to help someone out. I mean, you don't have to help 10,000 people, but if your research is just able to change one person's life, then, you sleep better at night, and that's part of the reward.
Reiko, I guess I would ask you the same question about the intersection of politics and academia, especially in a country like Japan, who is sort of on the verge of change, but also has this strong sort of neoliberal and nationalist discourse that's also coming into play.
I think both the neoliberal as well as the nationalistic or the conservative trend has been strengthened in the past decades. I think it also has to do with the value that we have. Everything has to be very efficient and effective and be very productive, which sidelines the reproductive work. But I think what we are facing is that the whole social reproduction of the society has been coming to crisis because of this growth-oriented economic model that would not take into account the whole reproduction, whether the reproduction of the natives or whether the reproduction of the migrants. So being pregnant, having a baby, having somebody to care is really being considered as a kind of a negative thing, because you cannot be efficient enough, you're not producing enough. But I think the whole value has to be changed. And so as the value that the whole nationalistic idea that the Japanese is like this. Like I encountered one comment by a Japanese director in the care facility that I was talking about the migrant care worker, and who is really brilliant, and he can handle everything very well, a very well trusted person. But then the director suddenly said that, but then he doesn't eat Japanese food at home. And I was really so shocked, because I thought that he can be capable of becoming the future director. But then this person was sort of clinging onto the idea of this Japaneseness, because in the care facility, it's also a lot of nationalistic cultures has been displayed, like every event, the seasonal events, for example. So to exclude himself and exclude his capability only because he doesn't eat Japanese food doesn't make sense at all. I was really shocked to hear that. So there's a very strong trend of this neoliberal as well as the nationalistic, and I think we have to face both.
The main thing I wanted to say is in terms of reproductive rights, that came up also in some of my studies in terms of temporary foreign workers and having to choose between your reproductive right and staying in Canada, and feeling like, you don't want to have a baby because you feel like if you have a baby, your employer is going to terminate your employment, although they won't say it's because you had a baby that they'll terminate your employment. And that really, really creates a struggle for some women in Canada, for some temporary foreign workers.
Thank you very much, everyone. Chelsea and Professor Salami and Professor Ogawa. This was very interesting. I'm so delighted if your collaboration project comes out of this webinar. But thank you again, Consul General Uchida, for your support and staying with us. And I greatly appreciate all participants for joining us today.